Vietnam has a rich history of amazing heroes, both male and female, who have contributed to the country's defense, culture and society, as we'll discover. Behind me, there is a statue of one of Vietnam's most heroic figures. I will share his incredible story with you in a few moments. My name is Lix, and I thank you for subscribing to my channel. First, I would like to introduce you to remarkable Vietnamese women who became triumphant generals and other heroines. Then I'll talk about heroic men. Toward the end of my presentation, I'll talk about two outstanding Vietnamese heroes from the 20th century whom I met personally when I was younger. I'll explain how they shaped the fate of modern-day Vietnam, so stick around until the finish. Let's start with Trung Chac and Trung Nhi, known as the Trung Sisters. They are famous heroines in Vietnamese history. In the 1st century, they led an uprising against the first Chinese rule and briefly liberated parts of Vietnam. Despite their heroic efforts, the Trung Sisters were eventually defeated by a Chinese general. Instead of surrendering, they chose to end their lives by jumping into the river. Their courage and leadership in the fight for Vietnamese independence have made them iconic symbols of patriotism and female strength. Vietnamese people commemorate the Trung Sisters at Tet, that is the Vietnamese New Year, and Women's Day. These courageous women are also remembered in schools and temples throughout Vietnam. In addition, every major city in Vietnam has an important street named after these two heroines, as well as other important heroes and heroines. Even in smaller places, such as the coastal beach town of Nha Trang, streets are named after them, as evidenced by this street titled Hai Ba Chung, which translates as Two Trung Sisters in English. Naming streets after national heroes in Vietnam honors their legacy, educates the people, and fosters a sense of national unity and pride. It is a custom that emphasizes the importance of recognizing individuals who have made important contributions to the country. According to Vietnamese acquaintances, during a visit in the 1990s, a Chinese president asked his Vietnamese counterparts, "We are friends now, why don't you change the street names?" The Vietnamese said, "Even as friends, we don't want to forget our history." Thus, street names honoring Vietnamese patriots and heroes will remain forever. Even a few Europeans made ripples in Vietnam, including Pasteur, the famed French microbiologist, and Swiss medical doctor Alexandre Yersin, who lived in Vietnam and discovered the rat-borne microbe that causes bubonic plague. Yersin also planted quinine trees, which yielded the first known effective treatment for malaria, a disease that is still prevalent in Southeast Asia today. The city of Nha Trang, where he treated poor people for free, has converted his home into a museum, holds an annual Memorial Day in his honor, and erected this statue in his memory. Let's discuss about another legendary female general, namely Chieu Thi Chin, also known as Chieu O. During the 3rd century, the Chinese Wu ruled Vietnam and executed almost 10,000 people. Chieu was enraged and organized an army of 1,000 men and women to engage in open rebellion against the Chinese. Despite having a comparatively small army, she defeated the Wu in almost 30 separate battles over the course of 2 years. During that period, she rose to the status of legendary fighter. She is still remembered for her tenacious resistance to the Chinese Eastern Wu dynasty. Despite her small stature, Lady Triệu fought boldly, commanded her own army and rode into battle on an elephant. She is reported to have said, "I'd like to ride storms, kill orcas in the open sea, drive out the aggressors, reconquer the country. undo the ties of serfdom, and never bend my back to be the concubine of whatever man. This image depicts a temple dedicated to Lady Triệu in Thanh Hoa province. She is a symbol of resistance to patriarchy and the enemies of Vietnam. And here we have Lê Chan, a magnificent beauty with martial prowess and poetic talent who rose to prominence in the 3rd century. She fled her homeland after a Chinese governor wanted to make her his concubine. Lê Chan rose to the rank of general, playing an important role in protecting Vietnam from foreign invasions. She is revered for her role in securing the land around the Cam River, which later became present-day Haiphong City. She is recognized for her military brilliance and strategic leadership in bringing her forces to victory. General Bui Thi Xuan was a female warrior during the early 19th century, whose list of achievements includes fighting a tiger and training an army of elephants for battle. She is said to have learned martial arts as a child and was reputedly a strong woman. She joined the so-called Tay Son rebellion, where she commanded 5,000 troops to successfully fight the Nguyen dynasty forces, but was later defeated and executed by them. She fought for the Tran Dynasty, which ultimately ended the centuries-long struggle between the Qin and Nguyen dynasties. The Tran also terminated the Lê dynasty and brought the country together after 200 years of division. The victorious Tran established a tributary relationship with the Qing dynasty of China and received recognition as Vietnam's official rulers from the Chanlong Emperor. Bui Thi Xuan, the extraordinary heroine, is revered as a symbol of feminine courage, fearlessness, and strength. Miss Nguyen Thi Dinh was born in 1920 to poor peasants who actively participated in the anti-French resistance struggle while Vietnam was a French colony. She then became active in organizing her own resistance to French colonial rule. During the Vietnam War, which the Vietnamese referred to as the American War, she was promoted to general and served as deputy leader of the National Liberation Front (NLF), directing troops in battles against the US military and the South Vietnamese regime. This newspaper article acknowledged her status as a leader in the female resistance movement. She played a significant role in the so-called Ho Chi Minh campaign, which resulted in the reunification of North and South Vietnam. She later held several political posts, including Vice President of Vietnam and Chairwoman of the Vietnam Women's Union. In summary, Nguyen Thi Dinh, another pioneering woman in Vietnam, committed her life to the cause of Vietnamese independence, equality, and social justice. The Vietnam War, referred to as the American War in Vietnam, was one of the most difficult times for Vietnamese women in recent memory, turning many of them into heroines and even martyrs. I have just mentioned a handful of the many outstanding women in Vietnamese history who demonstrated courage, leadership, and tenacity in the face of adversity. Their legacies continue to inspire generations of Vietnamese people, particularly girls and women, and serve as a reminder of women's important contributions to the country's history and culture. In addition to International Women's Day on March 8, National Women's Day is celebrated in Vietnam on October 20. This is one of the occasions on which society expresses its gratitude and admiration for Vietnamese women for all their sacrifices. And as I quote from a more recent Vietnamese news headline, Vietnamese women are improving their role and position in society by themselves. Now that we've talked about amazing female heroes, let's talk about some amazing male heroes. Hung Vuong, the founder of the Hung Dynasty, some 3,000 years ago, and the 17 Hung kings who succeeded him are credited with laying the groundwork for Vietnamese civilization. During their reign, the kings are said to have pioneered agriculture, hunting, and horticulture, and fostered a sense of patriotism among their subjects by preserving traditions. The Hung rulers inspire national pride and solidarity. The state-sponsored Hung King Temple Festival honors the Hung Kings and promotes the Hung King National Museum in Viet Chi City. The exhibitions at the Museum of Vietnamese History in Ho Chi Minh City are arranged chronologically, with the first exhibition entitled The Rise of the Hung Kings. This picture shows a procession of people in traditional clothing during the annual holiday in honor of the Hung Kings. The ancestral anniversary festival of the Hung Kings is celebrated for about 1 week at the beginning of the 3rd lunar month. And here we see children playing folk games at the Hung Kings festival. Ngo Quyen was the prefect of a province in the Red River Valley in the 10th century in what is now northern Vietnam, ruled by the southern Han Chinese. He was not only a military strategist but also a brilliant tactician. For the approaching war to eliminate foreign dominance, he had massive stakes with iron tips erected on the riverbed. When the tide rose, the sharpened stakes were covered by water. As the southern Han sailed into the river's mouth, the Viet sailed down in smaller boats, harassing the southern Han warships in an attempt to entice them to follow upstream. As the tide retreated, Ngo Quyen's men counterattacked it and drove the enemy fleet back. The southern Han ships were immobilized by the stakes. Half of the Han army was slaughtered or drowned, including the commander. As a result, the Han army retreated to Guangzhou. After defeating the Chinese at the Bac Dang River north of present-day Haiphong in 938, Ngo Quyen proclaimed an autonomous kingdom and established his capital on the Red River in Co Loa, which is believed to have been the capital of Vietnam's legendary Tran Dynasty. Ngo Quyen's military tactics used to drive out the Chinese were emulated by later generals in Vietnamese history. His reign marked a turning point for Vietnam. Although Chinese forces attacked repeatedly in the centuries that followed, the kingdom of Nam Viet remained autonomous until the French took control in the 19th century. A general of Vietnam during the Le Dynasty, Le Tuan Kiet, lived from 1019 to 1105. He is revered as a national hero in Vietnam for writing what is thought to be the country's first proclamation of independence. When the Chinese Song Emperor heard that the Dai Viet in the north would be defeated by the Champa from the south, he took the opportunity to rally his troops and issue a proclamation banning any province from trading with the Dai Viet in order to weaken the latter and gain control over them. To launch a preemptive strike against the Song dynasty warriors, the Le dynasty's king dispatched Le Tuan Kiet and over 100,000 soldiers to China. Following a 40-day battle close to present-day Nanning, the forces of Dai Viet, led by Le Tuan Kiet, emerged triumphant, seizing the commanders of 3 Song armies. When the Songs later united with Champa and the Khmer Empire and sent soldiers to conquer Dai Viet in 1076, an experienced commander was urgently needed to fend them off. The Le Emperor dispatched Le Tuan Kiet once more, who had set up spikes beneath the Nuet River and deceived the Song soldiers into falling into a lethal trap that resulted in the death of over 1,000 Chinese soldiers and the forced withdrawal of the Chinese. Their ambition to expand south was halted by the defeat. Behind me is a statue of Chan Hung Dao, an important member of the Tran Dynasty. He was a statesman, military strategist, and commander in the 13th century and successfully fought off Mongol invaders under the leadership of Kublai Khan. As commander of the frontier troops, he is best known for successfully repelling 2 major Mongol invasions in 1285 and 1288. The Mongols conquered and occupied countless countries. Chan Hung Dao, known for his strategic brilliance and leadership, prevented the same tragedy from happening to Vietnam. The Vietnamese also regard him as a symbol of heroism and patriotism. Chan Bin Chong was the general of the Tran Dynasty in the 13th century. During the second Mongol invasion, he was captured and sentenced to death. The Mongolians attempted to convince the Dai Viet commander to surrender by informing him about the precarious status of the Tran dynasty and offering Chan Bin Chong a position as a minister in China. However, the general declined this offer and the Mongolians executed him. He is now regarded as a symbol of loyalty and patriotism in Vietnam. His life narrative is included in Vietnamese textbooks, and he is honored as a national hero in many Vietnamese localities. The most revered Vietnamese hero of the Middle Ages was Le Loi, a 15th century general and emperor who helped Vietnam regain its independence from the Chinese Ming dynasty in 1428. He also built the subsequent Le dynasty. Le Loi, a wealthy landowner from the upper class, hated the Vietnamese nobility for their cooperation with the Chinese governors of Vietnam, called as Dai Viet at the time. His nation had essentially been free of China since the 939 uprising. Le Loi, who was deeply impacted by the social circumstances of the common people, who suffered while the Chinese and Vietnamese elite prospered at their expense, became furious with the Ming occupation, which started in 1407. He spearheaded several uprisings in 1418 with the intention of driving out the Chinese invaders. The Chinese army was routed and they withdrew back into China. In addition to this decisive victory, Le Loi's other achievement included land reforms to support the peasantry. As an army general, Le Lai was instrumental in the Le Loi uprising, which sought to expel the Chinese Ming army from Vietnamese territory. Against insurmountable odds, Le Lai demonstrated selfless bravery. As this painting shows, Le Loi asked Le Lai to put on a new robe and pretend to be a god to divert the attention of the enemy army. He then helped Le Loi escape by swapping clothes with him. Although Le Lai's bold advance into the enemy lines led to his capture and execution, his move was crucial to the final success of the uprising. Quang Trung, an 18th century emperor, united all of Vietnam by toppling rival imperial dynasties in the north and south. In the Battle of Ngo Quyen, he had overthrown the Qing dynasty and freed Vietnam from Chinese domination. His strategic acumen and military leadership are highly regarded. After renewed divisions, Vietnam was reunified at the beginning of the 19th century under the leadership of Emperor Gia Long. The last dynasty to rule Vietnam before the French annexation was the Nguyen dynasty, which Gia Long founded and of which he was emperor. He was born in Hue, Vietnam in 1762 and died there in 1820. He was a harsh ruler. Anyone who opposed the interests of the big landowners and the bureaucracy was rigorously suppressed under Gia Long. In his quest for power and order, Gia Long modeled himself on the Chinese bureaucratic model more than any other Vietnamese emperor. The Forbidden City, the Imperial City, and the capital Hue, the new capital 2 kilometers northeast of Phuoc, were all designed according to the Chinese model in Beijing. Chinese-style robes and Chinese-style residences and palanquins were compulsory for Vietnamese officials. Vietnamese women also had to wear Chinese-style pants. The Qing period, which lasted from the 17th to the early 20th century in China, served as a model for the legal system that Gia Long introduced. Even if he is not regarded as an outstanding patriot, the Vietnamese appreciate his contribution to the reunification of the country. Coming back to today's Vietnam, we must first and foremost remember Ho Chi Minh, whom the Vietnamese affectionately call Uncle Ho. He was the founder of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam in North Vietnam and the leader of the Vietnamese independence movement in the 20th century. Ho Chi Minh played a decisive role in the country's struggle for liberation from French colonial rule and later in the reunification of North and South Vietnam. This is a picture of the young Ho Chi Minh, who lived in several countries on 3 different continents and spoke several languages. Ho Chi Minh was the revolutionary who fought the longest and most persistently against the big powers' colonial system of the 20th century. Among its consequences was the deep crisis that the United States, the greatest capitalist nation, was experiencing on a national level. This is a picture of a rally against the Vietnam War in San Francisco in 1967. Millions of Americans took to the streets across the country to protest the war in Vietnam and force the US government to end it. Both Ho Chi Minh and Tito, the leader of Yugoslavia, created their own, more autonomous version of socialism in the 1960s, which differed from that of the Soviet Union. The Vietnamese leader also emphasized the importance of the peasantry in the struggle for social justice and independence. The forces led by Ho Chi Minh fought and defeated the Japanese, the French, and finally the Americans in their fight for Vietnamese independence. It was a turning point of historic proportions. In order to pay for his education and obtain a bachelor's degree in law, the renowned General Giap, pictured here reviewing battle plans with senior officers, labored in his family's rice fields as a young man. The Vietnam Independence Movement, or Viet Minh, was established in 1941 by Ho Chi Minh and his close allies, including Giap, an early Communist Party member. This photo shows Ho Chi Minh and young Ngo Nguyen Giap together. 3 years later, Giap organized the armed wing of the Viet Minh, which consisted of 31 men and 3 women armed with flintlock rifles. His command over Viet Minh rebels gave them early combat experience as they fought the Japanese in South China's mountains during World War II. Giap converted this unit into a potent guerrilla force and then a successful regular army in a matter of years. The Vietnamese military, under his leadership, defeated both the French colonial army and the invading and occupying American military and its allies. Giap, who was known to university students as a highly intelligent man, studied a lot of material on war, from Sun Tzu to Alexander the Great to Napoleon, and of course the writings of well-known military leaders in Vietnam. Thanks to his mastery of asymmetric warfare and his familiarity with the terrain and culture of Vietnam, he was able to outmaneuver and defeat far larger and technologically superior opponents. This brilliant general began as a self-taught guerrilla leader in the early 1940s and rose to become an outstanding strategist and one of the world's greatest military leaders in the 1950s and beyond, whose books and teachings are studied at military academies around the world. I had the honor and privilege of meeting the legendary general and his wife in person at their Hanoi home, as you can see in this photo. The elderly Giap was in good health, sitting upright, his voice and mind still sharp, and he spoke fluent French. We had lively discussions on a variety of topics, and his wife, Professor Dang Bika, who is much younger and fluent in English, joined us for tea. They have been married since 1946. His first wife passed away in a French-run prison after being tortured by the French. Despite fighting against the Japanese, French, Americans, Cambodian Khmer Rouge, and Chinese for more than 50 years, General Giap and his wife managed to raise 5 children. The French colonial power came to an abrupt end with a crushing defeat of the French army in the decisive Battle of Dien Bien Phu at the hands of General Giap. He offered me his book about this significant historical event, and he generously added his handwritten dedication to the book. Here we see the Viet Minh raising the flag after the defeat of the French army at Dien Bien Phu in 1954.
Long before I was born, Dang Van Viet, pictured here, was the youngest colonel in one of the first three main regiments of the Viet Minh, now the People's Army of Vietnam. General Giap entrusted this brilliant young officer with some of the most difficult military tasks. Colonel Viet led the unit that inflicted the first major defeat on the French colonial army at Colonial Road No. 4 near the Chinese border in 1950. Because of his achievements as commander of Regiment 174, which won several victories during the autumn-winter border campaign of 1950, his French opponents fearfully and respectfully called him the Great Tiger of Road 4. In the most significant battle in the border area, over 5,500 French soldiers were killed in just 7 days. The defeat was a major shock for France and a turning point. The Viet Minh had just proven that they had developed from a tiny ragtag bunch into highly experienced guerrilla fighters and even into an army capable of fighting a conventional war in a relatively short space of time. Many decades later, Dang Van Viet and I met on a tennis court and became friends. He remained cognitively and physically active and strong over the years, and we played tennis together a few times until he was about 90 years old. Pensioner Dang Van Viet, who can be seen in these photos, one of which I took with him, offered me his book about the momentous border battles he commanded, which paved the way for France's defeat at Dien Bien Phu 4 years later and the end of colonial power. Here is his book, which the fluent French-speaking author has published in French, and he added a signed dedication to his, quote, new friend, Lix in French. General Giap contributed a foreword for the Vietnamese edition of his book Flaming Road No. 4. Although his commander, General Giap, and President Ho Chi Minh recognized his patriotism and exceptional service to the country, Dang Van Viet was not elevated to general. In the People's Army of Vietnam, officers from the working and peasant classes had priority, which meant that he was not qualified because of his feudal class background. Dang Van Viet comes from a well-known Mandarin family. Some of his ancestors were generals who, for example, helped the Tran Dynasty to prevent the invasion and occupation of Vietnam by the Mongols in the 13th century. Many family members were scholars and ministers in different dynasties. His father was appointed by President Ho Chi Minh as a minister in his first government. An ardent patriot, Dang Van Viet gave up his medical studies in Hanoi to join the Viet Minh at the age of 23 to fight against foreign invaders and quickly became the Viet Minh's youngest lieutenant colonel. Dang Van Viet told me that he had fully embraced the policy of prioritizing soldiers from the previously underrepresented working and peasant classes, and that he would continue to study civil engineering and pursue a career in the construction sector. He maintained a close friendship with Ngo Quyen, whom he deeply admired until the legendary general died in 2013 at the age of 102. Officers from the working and peasant classes, who had reached the rank of general, showed their respect and affection for Dang Van Viet when they, including a female major general, visited the war hero in hospital at the age of 100, according to this Vietnamese newspaper report. Not long afterwards, Dang Van Viet died at the age of 101, 8 years after his great mentor Ngo Quyen. Rest in peace, my dear friend. These are just a few of the countless Vietnamese heroes who have contributed to the country's freedom, perseverance, and cultural identity. Their legacy continues to inspire future generations of Vietnamese and inspires pride and reverence for the country. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please click the like button. Also subscribe to my channel. See you in my next video.